Welcome everyone to episode 148 of the Send Nutrition Podcast with your hosts Bryan and Peter today. And today's podcast is on too much protein, the hidden risks in your horse's diet. How are you, Pete?
Bryan, very well. It's been a little while between drinks for us for the podcast. Obviously, you've had a few special guests on, but had a few diets, obviously, with people asking a question in regards to protein. Look, some horses showing signs of overfeeding protein, but also some with the signs of underfeeding protein. So we thought we'd sort of knock it on the head here and give a few pretty good examples as well, symptoms and signs to look out for with your horse may or may not be deficient.
Yeah, we're going to take you through each of the symptoms that you're going to see, but there's going to be a few bits of information here that you can discuss while you're having a Chardonnay around that campfire with your other with the other horse friends. And yeah, there's going to be a couple of myths that we're going to bust and a few things we're going to discuss that's even further along that other nutritionists don't really talk about. And overall, we're just going to take you through if you could be overfeeding protein, which actually underfeeds your horse's real needs. And these symptoms to look out for can really show if you are feeding too much, which is actually wasting money in your feed bill, but will also give you a few real world examples and the way the horse digests the protein and the truth about digestibility, with also reference to the National Research Council. So we're going to look at feeding protein smarter through this podcast and not just more.
Yeah, Bryan, with the numerous of diet consults that we do, a very common sort of phrase or sort of tagline is, look, I got to give my horse more protein, or I'm feeding this much protein. It's almost like people think that you can feed a horse unlimited amounts of protein and it's going to be fine. And some also think that, the more protein I give it, the more muscle it's going to put on, the more amino acid it has. But when I ask them, well, how much actual protein does your horse need? I haven't had one person yet that could give me a straight answer. And look, Bryan and I are pretty heavy in the performance side of things. As an example I gave on a previous podcast is a horse in full-time work, whether it's 5-6 days a week, whether it's a harness horse or a thoroughbred, only needs about 1.2 kilos of protein. So that's not 1.2 kilos of lucerne hay. It's 1.2 kilos or 1,200 grams of actual protein. And what does that look like? Well, if you've got a lucerne hay at 30% protein, which is 300 grams, that might be 4 kilos of lucerne hay, which will give you 1,200 grams of protein. So the example I've given, it's actually pretty easy to hit your protein requirements. It's actually very hard to do it while you're feeding a feed, which may be 10 or 12% protein. You might have, amino acid supplements on top of your feed with protein. So it's actually really easy to hit the daily protein requirements, even for a horse in heavy work, let alone, a pleasure horse that may need half the amount.
Yeah, I think there's a case of it's being overfed more than underfed in Australia. And as Pete gave you in that example, the roughage would really hit your protein targets. But our first myth to really debunk straight away is the percentage protein or crude protein on the bag isn't the be-all and end-all of the protein going into the diet. And we'll explain and expand on that later on. It's not the percentage, it's actually the grams of protein, as Peter said. And the National Research Council quotes it in grams per day, not a percentage of your overall feed, because it counts towards the roughage protein quantity and then also your hard feed quantity. And you've got to put them all together to get that end gram result. It's not about calories or quick energy because it's really inefficient to burn as a fuel source. So you don't want to overload the horse with protein. Protein is a building block. So think of it as bricks and mortar in your horse's body, but protein is actually made up of amino acids. So there's 20 total amino acids, 10 are essential, which the horse cannot make themselves. So they've got to slide it in the diet. And they're all used throughout the horse's body to repair and build muscle mainly, with also the support for hair, hoofs and skin, the immune system, tissue healing, and it can really help support the production of milk in brood mares. So think of the protein quality as the amino acid quality, and we're going to take you through the different types of hay as well and the hard feed base ingredients, talking about the protein quality, which is actually the amino acid profile.
Well, Bryan, if I'm sitting around a campfire, I've just sculled my Chardonnay and I'm pouring my second bottle after that.
well, this next part might
top me up, Bryan. I'm on to my second.
Yeah, this next part
Let me have it.
Get you grab a few shots of some spirit, because when you look at the bag of a feed, you've got, it says, for example, 16% crude protein. That analysis actually isn't even measuring the protein in the bag. It's actually measuring the total nitrogen in the feed, and it's actually a calculation estimating the protein in the bag. So what we're trying to say is, it doesn't tell you what amino acids are inside, especially the key ones like lysine, methionine, or theanine, but it gives you an estimate. So when you look at a feed that has, say, 16% protein, it may be deficient in what matters, which is amino acids like lysine and methionine. So it doesn't give you that quality. So you have to deep dive further to see where it is. So I think Peter and I, when we do a lot of the diet consults, we hear, my horse can't have more than 14% protein in the hard feed. When you look at the overall diet, 85% of the overall diet is roughage. That's your main protein source going into the horse. That hard feed's just topping it up with hopefully the best quality amino acid profile, and that's what we have in the Sen Ultimate and the Sen CF50. We understand where it can complement in the Australian conditions, as we are a country that does feed a lot of lucerne, as we know, but we don't want that lucerne to be the main roughage source. We want it to be a grassy hay, and if you got that fussy eater, they do put that lucerne through it.
Bryan, you're on fire today. If I'm at the campfire, I'm looking at the tequila now. Don't worry about the Chardonnay. But just further on what Bryan said, and back on topic, absolutely right. A lot of people just love protein. You know, I can't have more than 14 or can't have more than 16. Very well explained by Bryan. It's more about the amino acids. So you could have a feed that's claiming to have X amount of protein, but it's more about the digestibility of the protein. So that's the thing. You got to look at digestibility, the quality of the amino acids. This is why we use the faba bean. Obviously, legumes have extremely good amino acids, both the essential and the non-essential. So with the grain-free ultimate and a CF50, obviously we've got the balance right. We don't want too much protein, and we don't want to feed under as well. So you got to look at the overall diet as a whole, and that includes your roughage, where it might be hay, it might be pasture, it might be combination of both. And you got to look at, well, you've got a product like the grain-free or the CF50, depending on the horse that you have, whether it's a performance horse or it's a pleasure horse. You got to tally the volume of that feed going in on top of your roughage, and then you might even be feeding some additional amino acid supplements, which Bryan will get into later on, why they may be a very bad idea.
Yeah, and we can all reference back, because Peter and I are not just pulling this out of the sky. It's actually from the national requirements of horses, and that's the NRC, which was published in 2007. This is a gold standard guide to feeding horses. So they've done all the research, and let me take you through a real world example of a 500 kg horse in maintenance. So not in work, more like a paddock ornament. They only need 630 grams of a digestible protein per day. And you see, that is not crude protein. They're talking about digestible protein, and we have to expand on that later on, but let's just make it simple now. So 630 grams of digestible protein per day. This is easily met with, say, a Rhodes grass at 10% crude protein. Assuming your horse eats 2% of its body weight, around that 10 kgs per day, you're getting around that 500 grams already of that protein. And then look at your hard feed on top of that. That's easily going to meet that 630 grams of digestible protein per day.
Yeah, and I think going back to the diets, some of the more problem horses that we get through the diet consults, they're the ones that are feeding additional protein supplements or additional amino acid supplements. What we're trying to outline today is it's actually very easy to hit your protein requirements for your horse. It's, as I mentioned, earlier, don't want to sound like a broken record, but you could literally, for most horses in sort of pleasure work, not doing too much, you could literally reach the protein requirements just out of roughage alone without even looking at your hard feed.
Yeah, 100%, Peter. And in that example, when you're looking at the deficiencies in that Rhodes grass, so what we preach is feeding something to balance those ratios, especially the trace minerals. So you're at your 500 grams of your protein per day. You need to get to 630 grams. if you add 1 kg of our hard feed, which is around that 13% protein, you actually hit your protein requirements while balancing your roughage nutrient deficiencies all in one. And that's a really good base for a horse that's just chilling in the paddock, being that ornament.
Well, that's how people can't get their head around how we can have a 1 kilogram feed rate and it's more than enough per day. Literally that example that Bryan gave, if you manage to get your road grass analyzed, we know that they're from 8 to 13%. So, Bryan went the higher number there, and at that 2% body weight, literally you will get away with 1 kilo of our grain-free ultimate. It's really that simple. We could say you can feed 3 or 4 kilos to try to make more money out of it, but it's not the point. You're just going to have the horse eating less roughage, which costs you more money. With times like we are now, obviously every dollar counts. So when we simplify these diets, we don't just save the owners money, we actually make a healthier horse.
Yeah, 100%, Pete. We just want to feed more efficiently. And I think this is a fantastic segue for our listeners to hear what are the signs and symptoms if you're overfeeding. And overfeeding is really termed like 1.5 to 2 times that recommended amount. When you look at the NRC levels, these are ballpark figures for that horse's weight and condition and what they're trying to achieve. If you're a little bit over, that's fine, but we don't want to be 150 to 200% over. We will go through what the protein overload and the risk to your horse if it is high in the diet now.
Yeah, absolutely, Bryan. Do you want to go over some of these symptoms for our listeners here? I'm sure they're just chomping at the bit to find out exactly what things they should be looking out for.
Yeah, so I think the first one we can really touch on is dehydration risk. And what this means is when you have excess protein metabolism, it uses more water in the horse's body to excrete the nitrogen as you rear. So it's trying to clear that protein, but it's using the water meant to be inside the cells to try and clear it. So you got increased urine output, which then obviously increases the water needs for your horse. And if that's not replaced, you have a dehydrated horse. And that plays havoc in performance and is not ideal for any athlete.
Well, I always ask the people on my consults, and I'm sure Bryan does the same, the colour of their urine. That's normally a telltale sign. So if you've got a really dark, murky, cloudy, God forbid, white Iola urine, you know that there's way too much protein, and that horse's kidneys is sort of working through the roof to try to clear it out. You at the same time, you're spending energy trying to clear this protein. So instead of spending that energy building top line and muscle, you're actually using energy to excrete the protein, which is a wasted of energy source, so that horse is working pretty much overtime. And you got to look at, it's so easily preventable as well. So it's just feeding the right amount and you're not having to chase your tail.
Yeah, 100%, Pete. Everything in balance there. And that leads to our next one, where if you're stabling your horse and it smells like a gym locker or wet clothes and it just pongs, you actually could be feeding too much protein. And this is due to the ammonia gas, which happens when you break down the excess protein, or when the horse's body breaks down the excess protein into excess nitrogen into more urea in the urine. And this actually can cause respiratory issues in your horse, which is absolutely terrible because the ammonia irritates the lungs. It then leads to that coughing or a wheeze, and then your horse's performance does drop from that.
Bryan, I tell you what, I'm bloody shaking in my boots. Should we be reaching out for the vodka shots now or not? It's torture from you today.
Well, I think when you look at how easily it is preventable, and when you do, and we hear it probably weekly here, that the horse, like a performance horse, has a respiratory issue from something going on, it's one box that you have to tick, that you're not overfeeding that protein, and especially in those stalled horses in the performance stables. And it's not just performance horses. If you've got young foals that are stabled up as well, that can really hurt their respiratory system. And as you know, less oxygen being inhaled, like issues with respiratory, is less oxygen to the muscles, which easily decreases the performance.
Yeah, as an example, I think if you've only got access to lucerne, obviously, if that's the only hay that you can get access to because you've been in drought or whatever reason, it's even more reason to be looking at those lower protein feeds that are obviously higher in fiber, lower in sugar. Make sure you've got that full vitamin mineral profile in there to help complement the lucerne. Obviously, grassy is a little bit better. You've got in Victoria, you've got a lot of people doing the rye clover mix. Clover is a legume as well. Rye is pretty high in sugar, so the product like the grain-free ultimate, even a CF50, will complement those high protein, high sugar hay. So it's all about balance. On the flip side, if you've got like a laminitic horse, or even some of our guys in performance, they'll feed like a Rhodes grass or a teff hay, which is very low sugar, very low protein. We'll say low protein, but it's between 10 and 12%, which is on a lower scale compared to a lucerne. The grain-free ultimate and a CF50 complement both those hays as well, because obviously at that 13%, obviously there you got 12 to 10. You're still going to hit your recommended requirements, whether it's for low, moderate, or heavy work. So what I'm trying to express here is that always start with your roughage, and if it's a hay, find out what hay it is, and then obviously work your way down, rather than going into the produce store, getting your feed, and then sort of putting a cart before the horse in a way.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Pete. And when we look at probably this next part, this symptom really only shows up when a horse may flatten out or looks a bit fatigued. It's that acid-base imbalance. So excess protein increases blood acidity. What does that mean? So the body has to work harder to bring the pH balance back to neutral, which then makes your muscles in the horse fatigue faster. This can explain why some horses don't progress through a preparation, or they feel a bit flat. So looking at your protein intake is really important. I've had some clients, when they send blood test results in, and there's a lineup of them that send them through to check, because of my blood scientist background, total protein measured in the blood is actually not accurate. It's actually not correlated to your dietary protein intake. So just because it says high in your blood test doesn't mean you're overloading the protein. That's actually your hydration status and inflammatory marker. What you're looking for is urea level, which is the byproduct of your protein breakdown in your horse. And this can be due to excess protein in the diet, so that urea level. And if you can't see it on the profile, it could also be labeled BUN, which is just the method they use to estimate the urea. So blood tests, again, are tricky. Just because it says high protein doesn't mean that the dietary protein intake is high. And what you need to know is, and what is more important, is what your levels of protein going into the horse is what we reference.
Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield everywhere you look, and this is why we offer the diet consults. Obviously, myself, Bryan, Nicole, and even Angelique's doing a couple as well. We've done all the heavy lifting. We've done the groundwork. I mean, you can spend hours on these different online sort of software portals that you're getting all the green ticks, or you're getting a Red Cross. But we've seen many horses that have got the clean bill of health with all the green ticks under the sun, but yet it's losing weight. It's lacking energy. So it's not that easy. We advocate the less things obviously you have in your diet, the less things it can go wrong as well. So if you can balance it with a roughage, a good quality multivitamin product, or whether it's a complete feed, a good oil for omega-3 and fat and salt, it's literally that simple to tick all those boxes.
Yeah, 100% agree, Pete. And what it is when you do overload that protein in the diet, it's just expensive manure. So when you look at how protein is stored in the horse, it actually isn't stored like fat or the carbohydrates. It's either used by the horse or excreted. And if you're supplying 150 to 200% of what they need, they're just going to use energy to just like bring it out the other end. So unfortunately, that is how it works in the horse's body. And it also puts a load on their kidneys and liver, because a healthy horse can cope with it and they might not show the signs of this excess protein, but your older horses or compromised horses, but even look at horses in stress, in performance, you're just running a risk having that high protein level going in.
Bryan, is that the same when you and I go out in the beers and we break the seal and then it's just going out the other end all night?
Lately we're not fit in that area because we've been in major detox mode. So
we're saving our livers for the right time, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right.
Must be showing our age.
Everything in balance lately, which is good. And what we look for in our horses is that balance. And as Pete said, keeping it simple is what we do here at Sen. And Like the other signs that you can see or that could explain if you're overdoing the protein is that weight loss, the poor appetite, or the dull coat. And really when it comes down to it, the more protein is not better. It's not going to build a better top line. You need that more balanced levels.
A good example I'd like to share with our listeners here is the recent pasture analysis that we got done for a breeding operation pre-training in Western Australia for a new customer. And what we do is normally when someone contacts us and we ask them, have they got a hay that they're feeding throughout the year, or consistency, or even pasture coming through? And these guys have got pretty good pasture. Obviously had a bit of rain and the grass has come through. Anyway, so we got to test it as we always do, and then once we get the results, we will base the diet around that pasture analysis or a hay analysis to make sure that we're not shortchanging the customer, make sure that we're not heavy-handed and obviously feeding too much that the horses don't need, which then they'll excrete, as Bryan mentioned. But what caught our attention was, and initially it was even my reaction, protein was at 32%, and I showed it to Bryan. Hey, Bryan, look at this. They must be growing loose, and it was just a knee-jerk reaction. He goes, hey, Pete, what's the moisture? And I said, Bryan, it's almost 90%. So you go, well, that's only 10% dry matter. So if, last time I did my maths, if it's 30% protein and it's 90% moisture, that means it's really only 10% of the 30%. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, 3% overall.
So the horses are only really getting 3%, obviously, digestible protein, because it's basically 90% water.
Yeah, and that sort of highlights when we review a lot of diets that when a horse is in a paddock, and particularly a performance horse with a lot of muscle, and they're under supplemented protein, because the pasture, it may look rich, but it's actually 80-90% water, and that protein content must be measured in a dry matter basis. So that essentially makes it very low in protein, or the horse would have to be grazing the whole 24 hours and really intaking a high volume of roughage or that pasture. So then the easiest way is to supplement with sort of a protein-rich roughage in that lucerne or the grassy lucerne, as we see, but then also balancing those deficiencies with a good quality balancer like the CF50 or the Sen Ultimate.
And that's exactly what we did in that case, Bryan. I think the gentleman obviously added a grassy lucerne where there was a biscuit or two biscuits just to make sure we hit that requirement. Obviously, the vitamins and minerals through the grain-free Ultimate. And also we added the Sen Oil too, at even like just a maintenance 60 mil. Obviously, some of the horses looked like they were lacking fat. There is fat in pasture, but obviously like at 90% water, I think it was 5% or 6% fat.
Still pretty low. Hey?
It's still very low. So we needed to add the Sen Oil. So as you guys can see, we're not just plucking things out of the sky. We actually get a proper analysis, look at the hardcore numbers, obviously match our products against those numbers to try to basically fill in the voids or the nutritional deficiencies that are lacking in that pasture, and then obviously adding hay as well for that dry matter. Hay normally is around about 90% dry matter, so it's literally like a 180 compared to what pasture is, and sometimes you need both. Obviously fresh pasture is going to be a lot more water dense, moisture dense. If it's pasture that's been established for a while, or it might be late season or whatever, it's going to be a lot more dry, and it could get up to 70% moisture. So we've got one extreme to another extreme.
Yeah, and that kind of segues into the digestibility of that protein in that pasture, because Peter and I have really discussed in the past about the fiber digestibility in fiber sources like your roughage. So the acid detergent fiber, which is a test that you do to see if the fiber is highly digestible or non-digestible, it's just passing through. And a hay that has a high proportion of that non-digestible fiber is going to have a lower protein digestibility because it's passing through the small intestine into the hindgut, and the protein can't be absorbed there, and then it's just pushed out the rear end of the horse. So when you look at all the proteins of a hay type, so we'll take lucerne for example, lucerne can be around 75% digestible, the protein in it, and look at Rhodes grass or oat hay around the 50 or 60%. And so that goes back on what we mean about that number from the NRC. We have to look at it as a ballpark figure that we have to hit, because we don't know every individual horse's ability to digest the protein going in, and we actually can't test every single mouthful of grass or roughage that's going into the horse for its digestibility of the protein. So it's a good guesstimate, but as we said here is we can be in that ballpark figure and not double the amount or triple the amount that will cause these symptoms of overfeeding protein.
It's a bit of a minefield, and as I mentioned previously, this is why we offer the diet consult service, because it's even sometimes challenging for us when you've got different people getting, whether it's it's a new season hay and then the old season finishes. You got fresh pasture coming in, you've still got some old season hay. It's like a clown, juggling 6 balls. It's very easy to drop one of those balls, and when you get one wrong, then that problem starts compounding from day one, then week one, and then you're a couple of months in, and then you're feeding all this feed, but yet the horse is losing weight, and that's not because you're not feeding enough. It's something's gone wrong, but it's taking you a couple of months to pick it up, and then obviously now it might take another couple of months to fix a deficiency that may have been created without you not knowing there was a deficiency in the first place.
Yeah, it's quite alarming sometimes when we see some diets that come in and they're feeding obviously their roughage source and then another 3 or 4 kgs of a hard feed, and the horse is not doing much work. And you sit there scratching your head going, the quality of this feed going in, the digestibility is just not up to scratch. And here at SEM, we just take it all back to square one, get a better roughage source, get the hay tested, get the pasture tested, and then we can see where we sit and then work backwards for the needs of your horse. And this is not going to happen overnight, the condition change in your horse. It's going to be a more sustainable way. It's not overloading them on grain and taking shortcuts and messing up their whole metabolic function. It's about taking it slowly, being patient with your horse, because as we talked about in previous podcasts, when you change hays, it takes 2 to 3 weeks for the microbes to change. You need to let them really balance out to then start building condition on top of that, or building your top line. So it's really getting back to basics, and this really highlights the importance of not overdoing one nutrient in the diet, because it can just throw everything out.
Yeah, it makes me sort of wonder sometimes when we get customers or even phone calls, people feeding 5, 6, even up to 7 kilograms of a hard feed. I mean, wonder the owners, those manufacturing companies spend more time in Bali than they do in Australia. Probably having trouble spending all the money that they're making.
It is quite alarming when you look at it, and the amount of load that's going on the system of a horse, and it's not designed for their physiology to be that overloaded. And we use what nature intended them to do, and that's graze and make that foundation of their diet a good roughage source.
So, Bryan, maybe just get into the absorption of the hulls as well. So there's a few sort of feeds popping up. They're high fiber, low sugar, low starch. There's nothing much in them apart from just whether it's lupin hulls or whether it's soya hulls or you got sort of hemp hulls. The digestibility of those hulls is not great, is it?
Well, when we look at the protein digestibility of, say, a lupin hull base feed, the digestibility is less than something that we're using, like the faba bean base, which is the hull and the kernel. And when you look at digestibility in percentages, the protein digestibility for our ultimate would be around that 85%, whereas the lupin hull base, if it doesn't have any kernel, it's really low at less than 50%. It's a real moderate digestibility, and the energy that also is lower. And it really just highlights the shift that we've gone from that lupin hull base to the faba bean, and really zeroing in on this profile because it has those many benefits. And if this is your first podcast, I would go back and visit why we did that shift from the one bean base to the other bean.
Oh, absolutely. Without adding the kernel in, which obviously is the most expensive part of the feed, and that's why a lot of these companies don't add the kernel in because it's expensive, but that's where the good amino acids are. That's where the good digestible energy is. That's where we get our resistant starch. But there's a price to pay for it. Obviously, our feed, since we've gone to the faba beans around Australia, has probably come down $10 a bag, which is substantial in the current economy. Some of these other companies, they add a loosened leaf meal in with their house to try to bring up the protein level, the energy level. To me, that's just it's like a quick cheat almost in a way. I mean, lucerne, it's good. It's lucerne good for broodmares, young foals. Obviously there is a space and time to feed lucerne, but we try to make the feed as pure as possible, and you got to get the right mix of the hulls, which are obviously important as we do use hulls as well. but we are pretty heavy-handed with the kernels, and you got to get that balance right, and that's where you get the really good palatability. Obviously, you're not reaching out for another feed where we had the previous feed, obviously, being a loop and hull and loop and kernel base as well, but we just found that there wasn't enough starch, A, to maintain condition, B, to get that right amount of digestible energy. And look, horses, especially performance horses, they need a little bit of starch. And unfortunately, with the lupins at 1%, it's just not enough. And you're going to be reaching out, whether it's for oats, whether it's for a high fat fiber feed, you're going to be reaching out for something on top of the lupin products because that starch is just too low.
Yeah, and just going back onto that lucin, I'd rather give them that long stem roughage to really generate more saliva and be better for their gastric environment than putting into a pellet just to bring its protein up.
Well, that's where obviously, you may look at different feeds, they change, different colors sort of throughout the year. And, especially with the lupin ones, they might be like a light yellow and then suddenly, they go to like a dark yellow. Well, last time I checked, the lupin is a yellow color on its own. So it shouldn't go light yellow to dark yellow. It's only when it's mixed with like a lucin meal or a lucin hay or something, that's when it may change colour. So just keep an eye on your feed if you are using those lupin or sort of soybean products.
And when you do compare it to our faba bean base, like the Sen Ultimate and the CF50, we're just more nutrient dense. So what does that mean? It's a lot more digestible protein and energy, and is actually a better base feed, particularly for that performance horse, but also those horses coming into winter that can lack condition.
One exercise for our listeners might be is, and I think one of our trainers that we do a lot of business with, that we've known for a while now, is I filled the Sen Dipper. So if anyone's got a Sen Dipper on them, if you fill that with our grain-free ultimate, you're going to see at the brim, you're going to be sitting close to 1.25 to 1.3 kilos. If you were to get another high fiber feed and you're going to fill it to the brim, I think you're barely going to touch a kilo. So that shows you how much, obviously, of the kernel that we're using, how much digestible energy, obviously, that we're getting. But it also shows you the protein quality and the amino acids that go into that product.
Yeah, in summary for that is it's better bang for your buck, Pete.
Well, feed less, Bryan. Obviously, get more nutrients, better in your back pocket, more money to spend on your favorite beverage. And it may be kombucha as well. Who knows?
Apparently, it's easy to make that kombucha. But I was at a lunch the other day, and this guy told me how to make it, and I was more confused than ever. There was a lot of.
I'd rather watch grass grow, Bryan.
It's very good for gut health for us humans. But I think one last thing I wanted to touch on was for the excess protein in a horse's diet, the risk to a young horse. And we've got a lot of clients that are breeders or own those or have farms and have younger horses. And what you don't want in a growing horse is that excessive protein. They do need a higher protein requirement, but it must be balanced with energy, also the calcium phosphorus for their bone growth. But excess protein without enough energy can lead to imbalanced growth, joint issues, or poor top line. So more protein in a young horse is not better. And again, it's always to check what is going in, including that roughage source.
Yeah, with lucin, I know a lot of breeders are heavy-handed with lucin. Last time we checked, and Bryan, you may correct me, the calcium to phosphorus ratio is a little bit out naturally, yeah?
Oh, it can be really way over the top with calcium.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And low on phosphorus. So that's where we've got both calcium and phosphorus. I think we're about 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 calcium to phosphorus. So you are getting some of the phosphorus in with the grain-free ultimate and a CF50 if you are sort of heavy-handed or you've only got access to the lucin hay. So that'll help balance out that lucin by us having enough phosphorus in our feed as well. Yeah,
you don't want to be over that 5 to 1, which is the upper limit of good absorption for obviously that bone growth and all the other parts of the body, including muscle contraction as well. What we can do now is just give you a quick wrap-up or a checklist of what you should be looking for after you've listened to all this, and hopefully you've got a little bit of Chardonnay at the bottom of that glass.
Bottle.
So what we strip it down to is use the NRC or the National Research Council's data to calculate the grams per day of the protein needs. It's not just the percentage on the bag. We can do it here at Sen, and that's what we kind of aim when we get our diets submitted to us. we look at the overall protein intake as a ballpark figure. It's not right down to the exact gram that you have to hit, because you're never going to get the exact gram because of the various factors that we've just outlined with digestibility and the quality of the protein going in. Don't just choose a high crude protein percentage, because that doesn't show the actual amino acid quality, as we've said. And make sure that they have access to clean, fresh water at all times, just in case that protein is on that upper level and the hydration risk is a factor.
And also don't forget salt, at least 10 grams sort of per 100 kilograms of body weight. There's still a lot of people that we talk to that don't feed salt. A lot of them love the salt licks. And, I think I've repeated this probably a million times. Horses don't have tongues like cows. So, a cow's tongue is obviously much more coarser. It can handle those salt licks or the mineral blocks. Horse tongue's probably a little bit similar to ours, where if we were to try to lick those mineral blocks or the salt licks after a week or 2 weeks, our tongue will be shredded into pieces. So there's no way that they're licking 30 grams of salt or 40 grams of salt on a lick. This is why those salt licks last for like 6 years.
Yeah, it's so inconsistent, and feeding horses must be a consistent thing when you look at how delicate their systems can be and what we're trying to achieve with them. Every 1 to 2% matters in performance, and we have to really zero in on the way they're being designed. And as Pete outlined there, their tongues are not for that. And when you get stalled horses, it's more like a boredom lick that they're going to do it. They're not going to really measure out 50 grams of licking and really hit that target, unfortunately. So in the feed is the best way. If you've got a fussy eater, split it between the two feeds, or can put it in some water, but also ensure there's other fresh, clean water available as well.
I think that pretty much sums it all up, Bryan. I think we're stuck at around about 121 5-star reviews on Spotify. Bryan's given me his word that he's going to break his alcohol fast if we can get it to 130. So guys, please get behind us. I want the old Bryan back. I don't want the fasting Bryan.
There's been a request for a podcast to do that, but we won't do that. But overall, with protein in a horse, feed what your horse needs and not what looks good on a label. When you look at even protein supplements that you can add on top, complete proteins are better. I know they're trying to supply some essential amino acids that the horse doesn't make, but it has to be all in balance going in. So that can be a bit of a minefield, what is right for your horse, because you can add a separate protein supplement, but then not taking into account the other parts of your diet might also have the right amounts of the essential amino acids. So you're just doubling up. And that's just a really expensive manure at the end of the day.
Well, Bryan, most people are trying to sell those supplements. They're not selling a balanced diet like we are. So I understand people got bills to pay. But the thing is, if your diet is balanced, then you may not need those essential amino acids because you're getting it naturally out of a balanced diet. So I'm all for supplements, obviously, to help balance a diet if it needs balancing. But it's much cheaper, simpler, and healthier for your horse to start with a balanced diet, and don't be reaching out for those supplements which your horse then won't need if the diet is balanced in the first place.
Yeah, well said, Pete. And we'll just leave you with this. So these two things you can easily quickly check your feed. So it's actually how many grams of digestible protein is your horse actually getting, not the percentage on the bag. And are you testing your forage, or are you just guessing because you just don't know? And I think to make it even more simple, if you're not seeing these signs and symptoms, your horse is looking good, performing well, you probably don't have much to worry about. But it's always good to get a good check on this just to see where you stand and hopefully not run into any performance issues in the future. So, yeah, and I'd just like to thank everyone for all your support with the podcast, because we get day in, day out the references to our podcast and the learning that we want to try and help as many horse owners in Australia really understand the physiology of their horse in a more simple way, because there's a lot of chaos and noise in the industry. And the way our mantra to feeding has been proven time and time again, even at the top level, and it's only going to continue with the success that we're seeing.
Absolutely, Bryan. I don't have anything further to add. Guys, thanks for your time. Please give us a 5-star review, whether it's on Apple or on Spotify. Bryan really loves them when they come through. We high five each other when we get one. I've thrown him under the bus. Sorry.
All right, maybe I'll just break the alcohol fast now.
All right, bro.
You're right. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Yeah.